I got one question. Are we making a difference? Are we making a difference? Come on! We're going to spend our whole lives not making a difference. Hey, it's great to have you guys all here. We are exploring California. We did Napa, we did Monterey, we're now here in San Diego. This state is beautiful and it rocks, but just expect us to continue to move and explore the rest of this beautiful country. It's great to be here. It's great to see so many friendly faces. I've been in this industry for about 13 years now. I really think when I look back, I will have dedicated my life to this industry, and I can't think of anything more important. I grew up and fell in love with computers when I was 19, somewhere around that age. I just was hooked. It's a way of life for me. And what we are doing is all about making our way of life for ourselves and for our children safe. And I love that. So let's get into it. First of all, you are all the Identirati. And if you didn't know that, it's your official title now. Because you are here at the Cloud Identity Summit, and this is where we really move the needle and kick the ball down the field. You will see it and feel the acceleration of the identity industry as a result of all the ideas that get shared here in the next 4 days. So we have nearly 1,000 people that have signed up to this year's conference. It is fantastic to see us hit a critical mass. I'd like to see this conference be 10,000 people in another 5 years. So we've got some work to do. We've got to spread the love. I'm André Durand. I'm the host for the next 4 days, and we've got a lot to do, so let's get right into it. Welcome to Border Security 1.0. This is Border Security pre-walls. This is our new dog, Sierra. She's an Anatolian Shepherd. She is the love of our family. Even my wife, who calls herself a cat person, didn't get dog people, all of a sudden, now doesn't quite get dog people, but does get Sierra. She loves Sierra. This is Sierra waiting for the mailman. 2 o'clock every day, the mailman comes by. She can see him park some ways away, and he walks up the street till he gets close, and she goes absolutely crazy. It's a good thing that we have walls keeping her from the mailman, and not vice versa. I looked her up. She's an Anatolian Shepherd. It's a sheepdog. So there's a great little list of things that she's bred. Her instincts are to protect. So here goes. Her mission in life is to protect sheep, goats, and livestock, the moon, lawn furniture, bird feeders, and any all real or imaginary intruders. So she is our family's intrusion detection system and our border patrol all rolled into one. And at night, she's a 120-pound lead weight sitting on our feet. All right, so the truth is, we love our borders, we love our fences, we love our walls. They do make us safer. Let's not forget that. But how did we get them all? There was this great Washington Post article called "A Flaw in the Design." I think it just recently came out. I read it like a week ago, and I said, what a great opening session to understand how we have all these walls and what we're going to do going forward. Let's go back to the beginning a little bit. So it brought to light a history that some of you lived through. I lived kind of right at the beginning of this, but frankly, it wasn't my time. Late 1960s, 1970 thereabouts. Do you know today we have more people on the internet than we had people living on Earth in 1960? It's kind of staggering to think that. So when talking about the creation of the internet, David D. Clark of MIT said, and I'll quote, "We knew there were untrustworthy people out there, and we thought we could exclude them. David and others who designed the network focused on moving information," and moving my notes, there you go, since I'm reading, focused on moving information quickly and reliably. They foresaw the need to protect the network against intruders, but they didn't anticipate, Cruz, I need a motion sensor, here we go. They foresaw the need to protect the network against intruders, but didn't anticipate that the internet's own users would use the network to attack one another. Interesting. Janet pronounced her last name correctly. I think it's Abate of Virginia Tech said it well. People don't break into banks because they're not secure. They break into banks because that's where the money is. And there's a lot of money on the internet. The internet has taken the notion of crime and it's virtualized it, it's globalized it, it's democratized it. Now anyone can reach around the world with their computer into our pockets. It's tough. This is a tough environment we live in right now. In 1988, before the first internet worm hit, internet's designers had 7 priorities for the internet. The word security didn't even appear. 20 years later, a new list of priorities was drafted, and the first word was simply security. With a dumb core and an intelligent edge, and disambiguate that from the phone networks before, where they had a dumb edge and intelligent core, completely the opposite. This is a quote from one of their designers. "I wish then, and certainly continue to wish now, that we would have done a better job with regard to security. We could have done more. And most of what we did was in response to issues as opposed to anticipation of issues." So while our security is improving, we are on a trajectory as an industry. The problem is there's another trajectory of attacks. And the question is, are those trajectories diverging? Because it certainly feels like right now they are diverging. We need a radical new way of thinking. Doing more of the brute force of what we're doing is not working. We're definitely going to have to be smarter than this. So we've got to ask ourselves, is our perimeter as relevant in 2015 as it has been since forever, since we connected our networks to the internet and created a good haven or a green zone for our protected assets and the presumed unknown and malicious on the outside? So here's what's happening. From an enterprise perspective, we moved some portion of the applications to cloud adoption. About 20% of apps today are consumed as SaaS applications. Somewhere around 2008 or so, we really started to adopt smartphones. Around 2010, I think if I get this right, the iPad hit. So the user followed their devices off the corporate network, off corporate issued computers. Now the user was outside the firewall. And we sit now right at the cusp of what I think is kind of the last nail in the coffin of a big shift, which is the adoption of infrastructure as a service, the need to collapse the number of data centers, the cost and footprint associated with that, treat it as a utility, design our applications as if they're all SaaS applications and they can be deployed in any combination of on our networks, in the private cloud, or in the public cloud. We want to treat them all the same. Well, these things have shifted the perimeter. A lot of this infrastructure we no longer control. But just because the borders are shifting, are we really calling for a deperimeterization? I don't think so. If anything, we're putting up more borders. We're putting up more granular borders, and I'll cover that in a second. But as the borders around the things we look to protect, become more granular, so too must our way with dealing with access. We can't be throwing up a new user account and a new password at every single new application, every new perimeter that we erect. So there needs to be a way to move users seamlessly throughout all of this highly distributed infrastructure that we now have. And we have to have a new strategy to protect those things that we care about, a new approach. So to not misinterpret this year's theme, because I've even seen it inside of our own company, you can kind of run away with this theme like, let's just get rid of all the borders. And that's really not what we're saying. We envision a world with borders. Perimeters have their place in the evolution of our defense, but we envision a world where the identity is actually borderless. That's actually what we're doing. We're creating an identity system that can permeate these borders. So when the internet was crafted, it was one big network, and we said, well, we can control who is on the network. Turned out to be a false assumption, right? The internet is trusted. We can trust the people that are on the internet. So when we connected our networks to it, we needed to put up a wall between our network and the larger internet. And that was kind of the first perimeter that we put up. But we didn't stop there, right? Computers were the things that were, the internet was just a transport vehicle. The endpoints were intelligent. It was actually the computers that were attacking other computers on the internet. So we needed all of this other endpoint technology to get smart and protect the actual devices that were the entry point to the network. Move on to the next one. So device is just another extension of that. We're sitting right on the edge now of all of these devices. What are we going to do about these? Another new entry point into the internet. But it doesn't stop there. For the last few decades, we've known that with every new application, we introduce a new identity. And then from here now we have APIs, which are the foundation for all of these mobile applications making calls into our enterprise. We have all of this enterprise mashup going on. We have microsites that need to talk to one another. We have white labeled services that are making calls to other applications. We somehow need to know the user identity so we can stream an end-to-end transaction of user identity across all of it. Some of it in our control, some of it not in our control. So what's changing here is that the identity component of this is the steel thread that needs to permeate all of these layers. And if anything, what I'm observing is that identity is finding its way from, call it, coarse-grained identity to fine-grained identity. It's moving further and further back into our systems. It's not enough now to just know identity as they're traversing our outermost perimeter. We've got other perimeters inside that we're needing to permeate identity into. I've had large enterprises throw up these hugely complex enterprise diagrams, and you would think that they were talking about their entire ecosystem of partners and how identities, and they're not doing that. It's just their own network. It's massively complicated with lots and lots of layers, and really what they're asking is, how do we take identity even inside of our own network and move it seamlessly all throughout, all the way to the back end. So what's changing, in fact, as I said, is that identity is becoming borderless. So here's a way to think about it. I couldn't find a good picture of this. I'm actually surprised I couldn't. We're building the world's largest hamster trail. And you can just imagine that visual, right? We have identities moving through secure tunnels into other bubbles. Each one of those is a security domain. Sometimes we have bubbles within bubbles within bubbles and tunnels inside of there. Now, fact of the matter is, I prefer not to hard code the way in which all of these connections work. So maybe that's where the metaphor of the hamster trail breaks down. It needs to be a lot more dynamic than a hard-coded hamster trail. But in effect, that's what we're doing. Identity is the new perimeter, is this notion that if we build the right identity infrastructure, we can move identity between all of these security domains. So to get there, we should recognize that security and identity are actually not separate conversations. We both want the same thing. Even if security is from Mars and identity is from Venus, we both want security utopia. And I believe we will redefine security around identity to actually get there. And this is a term that, inside of our company we're referring to as identity-defined security. It's taking the conversation, it's taking the two worlds, and it's really starting to put them together. Which, oh, by the way, they're coming together on their own whether or not we realize it or not. The traditional security industry is really waking up to the importance of identity. They realize that all of the places in which they want to garner intelligence or instigate control to enable security all require some notion of identity. They no longer have a natural choke point because all the assets have been spread all over the internet. There's no natural place for them to aggregate things if they don't first backhaul users and know who the user is in the context of what they're trying to do. So this is already occurring. So I think we're on a journey, let me go back one. I think we're on a journey to really identify everything and bring full identity visibility to our networks, our applications, devices, and everything, which is appropriate because we're only trying to connect everything to everything and keep it secure. I believe we're on a mission. Well, let's see here. Now I'm just confused by my notes and my screen, so let me just move on. I covered that one. So here's kind of an interesting slide. We used to joke about this one. It wasn't really a joke, frankly, 10, 13 years ago. This is before I actually knew anything about identity, so had a lot of time, didn't have a company either, really. It was just a room with a couple people. Had a lot of time to think. And we were just projecting, if you will, what sort of a journey we were on. And it kind of became obvious to us really, that the internet started out with a certain amount of anonymity by default. And the journey that we've been on to create identity visibility is a journey because there is so much money in figuring out who the user is. There's no money in anonymity. And so really what we're moving into is this notion of identified by default. There's a lot of money, predictive money, to know who you are, what your interests and likes are, what your past purchasing behaviors are. There's a lot of money in that. There's not a lot of money in the anonymity side of this equation, which kind of leads you to believe if we've gone from like one default to now another default, what does the future hold? And I think this is a scary possibility, that you get one price of services when you're known, and you have another price of services when you're unknown. And don't be surprised if things emerge in this direction. As much as we probably have our hair on the back of our neck stand up at that. So our assumptions, let me just kind of change gears here a little bit. Assumptions are really dangerous, and I've had my own experience with assumptions. Running a business has lots of assumptions. You make lots of assumptions in your annual planning, in product roadmaps, in what you think is actually going out on the market. And if you're not really careful to challenge those assumptions and look hard, you can just bypass some very important triggers, things that you are assuming to be true because they've been true when in fact they've actually already changed. And so here, I think we've made some assumptions both prior to us in the security industry. I think we are making some assumptions as an identity industry, and I would just caution us to be aware that we're actually making them. Know what they are. The first one was in 1970. Only good actors would access the internet. That was the assumption. They knew it could be an issue, but they had the assumption that they could control who was actually on the internet. Turned out to be false. 1970 today, the perimeter is secure. We can actually create a perimeter. We can actually keep the perimeter secure. We can actually keep the people behind the perimeter are all good actors. I heard a great quote this morning. A person said, we have a lot of people that like us. We have a lot of people that don't like us. Unfortunately, we have some people that don't like us that work for our company. What do you do then? So this is another assumption we have to be careful about, especially as the apps and the users have moved outside of the traditional perimeter. Like fame, security is fleeting. We have job security in our world. Right? The money is behind the things that we are creating to protect those, which means this is a never-ending arms race. But I think that we can make some big jumps as an industry by moving from one paradigm to another paradigm. Our job will never be done. When identity is the gate, identity will be the thing that's attacked. So today, I would ask, do we think that identity will save us? Because it's easy to kind of jump to the conclusion that the old paradigm is broke, there needs to be a new paradigm, and everything will be great under the new paradigm. But if you really look at where we're at right now, I would question whether or not identity is not already the weak link in the new paradigm. Meaning 73% of network attacks happen because of lost or compromised credentials, not because they somehow made it through the perimeter. They just walked through the front door. So there's all these analogies: big walls, paper door. Big door, left the glass out of the window. The truth is, identity today is not where it needs to be the infrastructure to protect us. And we are in a race right now to get this right. We are extremely exposed. So what would we do, to that earlier quote, if our perimeter were already breached? It's probably a safer assumption to assume that's the case, and then ask yourself, what are we going to do about it? How would we even know that this has occurred? I don't remember the exact stat, so I won't cite it, but it was a huge number of intrusions go undetected. I don't want to say like for months, much less days or hours. So big assumption here, and something we should all be asking ourselves. What if the right identity becomes a bad actor? I like to say, you're a good actor right up until the second you're not. And then what? So this whole notion of trust and the time associated with trust on all these systems, when we're dealing with identities at scale, it's a massive issue. What if identity today is too weak and too disconnected to protect us at scale? I would say that this is largely true. I would say that as an industry, we hold a lot of promise, a lot of smart people working on the problem, but I would say that this is probably very true. We're going to have to do a lot of work as an industry, a lot of collaboration to close the gaps. it's bigger than any one of our companies. It truly is bigger than anyone. No one company, no matter how big, has all the answers for this one in all the permutations of consumer identity and enterprise identity and partner identity, all the device identities that are coming on board, all the relationships between the devices and the users and the apps that we're going to have to construct in that massive hamster trail. There's a lot of collaboration as an industry. So I would really encourage us all. Most of the people and companies in this room make up the heart and soul, the identity of this industry. So most of the connections are already here in the room to make. While we've made a lot of progress in the last several years, we really need to stay on task. So there's 5 things that I think we need to do to stay on task. And the first one, this is a beat up meme at this standpoint, but yeah, we need to do a way better job at binding carbon to silicone. Shared secrets are obviously the massive, massive weak link in this equation. One of the things I'm really excited about is the fact that we now have a smartphone in our pocket, and they're basically ubiquitous. Maybe not 100%, but getting darn close. They are the most sophisticated device that's always been with us. On mine, I've got everything sitting right there, including my credit cards and driver's license. And if they're not taped to the back of the outside, now they're going inside the phone with Apple Pay. So always connected, super powerful, a growing number of capabilities, biometrics, location behavior. Sky's the limit on what we can do to reinvent this authentication event and make it much stronger. And oh, by the way, not make the user experience any worse than it already is. As a matter of fact, I would argue we can probably make the user experience a lot better. Standards. This has been a conversation of mine for a decade or more. We're still not done yet. Thank goodness we're still not done yet. But we need to keep pressing. If anything, I would suggest to the enterprises out there, I get a lot of conversations about how do I get someone to do a standard on the other side? And I like to say, well, how about you tell them you won't buy their service unless they expose a standardized identity interface so that you don't have to go code something that's proprietary just to connect with them. Start there. Fortunately, we've got some big customers that say, that's exactly what we're going to do. Build that into the RFP process. These lines need to be there. And oh, by the way, watch how fast the service provider industry responds to that. The second a deal is on the line at the end of a quarter, it goes quick. So we have to be able to convey the whole life cycle of an identity. It's all going to be codified into open standards that allows us to loosely couple all of our various systems together. We need to move from big trust, this notion of I don't trust you, log in, I trust you a lot. This whole notion of trust, which, oh, by the way, is a big word, probably get in trouble even for saying this, but as I think about it, trust is this thing that lives in the middle of the risk and cost assessment and my convenience. And somewhere in there, if my convenience is at stake and the risk and cost isn't too much, I'll just put a big word called trust. First time I experienced this is when I had a new car, drove right up to a valet at a restaurant, realized the parking lot was 2 blocks away, and some 17-year-old young man sitting right there with a t-shirt on in the corner, and I just handed over the keys. I walked out, didn't ask for his name, didn't do anything. I just handed him the keys and walked in. It's because in my mind, I went, I don't want to go 2 blocks and pay $10 when I can pay $10 right here and drop it off. Trust. I just trusted that that was a scenario. We do that in our worlds. We have big trust. We need to move to this notion of microtrust. How can we do that? Well, we got to take the cost down and make sure the inconvenience factor doesn't go up, because that's the space that trust lives in. And so microtrust is going to be trust a little more based on our behavior. Maybe all of a sudden I really need to trust you log in through an explicit event, not a passive factor. Trust a lot. Good behavior, maybe I trust you a little bit more. Okay, you did something that was suspect, I trust you a little bit less. With automation, we can get to this notion of micro-trust. We have to collapse the amount of time. Trust is a subscription. In the automated world, cost being the same, it should last about a second. I trust for about a second. It's as long as the behavior is on track with the amount of risk I'm willing to assume. So here I had a conversation. This slide was blank at first, and I knew I needed to address it. I just got back from Australia, talked to a whole slew of government entities that were dealing with, I think, probably a lot of the same issues we deal with here in the United States, which is without a national ID card, what's the foundation from which they interact with their citizens and enable all this public-private partnership, and how do they bootstrap themselves there because there's nothing, the bedrock is not there for them to build up. And so I had to send out an email to my CTO team. I get this email back from John Bradley, and I do have permission to read this. I just said, I'm just going to put it up here verbatim. So here it is. Americans believe that it's a feature of the US that we can reinvent ourselves. Having the government control our identity would obviously be a flaw in our system. Fixing identity in the US isn't actually what citizens want. Unfortunately, everyone in the US has had enough information stolen to get through remote verification several times over. The great thing about Apple Pay for thieves is that while the transactions are secure, the banks aren't as secure around enrollment. Turned out to be a great way to use stolen credit cards. Honestly, the US is totally screwed, and you probably need a national ID. But the first person to say that publicly will get shot, and probably the second person too. Paper source documents are in even worse shape. Nobody can actually verify them because you have so many issuers. Chile has a national ID card and a government open ID service for accessing government services. And we can get online verifiable source documents like birth certificates. I tried to get the head of the Chilean Civil Registry to come up to CIS to talk about what we do in the third world. Bottom line is KBA is dead. The question is, what do we replace it with online? I don't have answers for this, but having been in a lot of conversations, wow. Are we building this whole super secure system on a bedrock made of sand? That's a big question for this industry. Our strong authentication is only as good as our enrollment. And if our enrollment is weak, it's going to be weak. My credit card number was compromised last Thursday. Tried to get a coffee at McDonald's, got denied, didn't think about it, got denied at lunch, called them up. Turns out they were dead on money. There was a Minneapolis Speedway, 2 tickets to Minneapolis Speedway, signed purchase on there. They caught it right away as soon as the signature and stopped it. That was great. Thank you for doing. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have stories where they did that, and it's like, come on, I travel to Europe all the time. Stop shutting it off every time I'm going to the right place. Blame the guys doing the algorithms. Don't blame the notion of dynamic access control. We need to evolve beyond our static access control into the more dynamic access control. So we definitely have the capabilities to do this. The algorithms are getting real, and the algorithm makers are getting really, really good. We need to have ways to look at the behavior, the intelligence in big data, right? And feed that back into our systems so that we can control access more dynamically. I'm not saying we need to get rid of our static access control mechanisms, but we need to layer another layer on top of it, leveraging this. We haven't done that to date. I mean, we have. We haven't done it as an industry. I'd like to kind of share some kudos. Just thinking back, so 1 year's gone by, where did we make a difference? There's been a lot of success stories in the last year or so, but this one in particular really kind of caught me. It's really kind of clear to me, OpenID Connect has moved the needle in the last year. It's really kind of hard to deny that. So the work on the spec, NAPs, Mobile Connect, the implementations, the adoption, we've really moved the needle in a short amount of time. Someone was saying, well, hey, did the SAML adoption take as long? I said, yeah, it was kind of linear on SAML, but everyone was new to Federation and new to Trust and new. Now, all of a sudden, we've got a whole group of people up to speed. We're introducing a new capability. They've dealt with a lot of the problems that these new protocols are now addressing, so the adoption's much faster. So special thanks to the OIDC Foundation, to OIX, Open Identity Exchange, and to some individuals, and I'm sure I'm going to miss some, but these are the people that came up. Mike Jones, John Bradley, Nat Sakamura, no, I pronounced that one wrong, Brian Campbell, Roland Hedberg. Those are some names that kind of came up as people that are dedicating a lot of time and effort. And thanks to everyone else who has dedicated their time and their intelligence and their passion to that protocol. So the confluence of 2 worlds, as I see it, the security industry, kind of a separate industry from a different planet, the identity industry, all of you here really would love to see those come together. And in that confluence is going to be a lot of magic. That's where the magic happens. That's where 2 different ways of thinking come together. How do I protect? Where's my border? How do I enable? Where's my identity? I see those 2 things coming together. This is a really, really important year. It's kind of identity's golden years. I think we're kind of there. And as I've said earlier, be glad that you are here at a moment in time where you're making it. It's not as fun when all the creativity is done and it's just about scaling it. Of course, it's fun for a different group of people. But for people that really like getting into the recipe, this is a very, very special moment. So thank you all for being here. That's it for me. And I'm going to have Alex up. But before I do that, Alex, just one second. We're kind of ahead of the curve this year. You know, every year we take a poll, we say, where do you want to go next year? And we've done that several years in the past. Of course, we exit this show and we're exhausted. So it's like we all go into hibernation and get back to our jobs. There's a lot of effort to pull this thing off. 3 months goes by, and then we wake up and say, we don't even have a website up for next year. Where are we going to go? Where's the hotel? And so this year we said we need to get ahead of that. We took a poll of a number of you, and we're happy to announce next year, 2016, is going to be in New Orleans. So this is going to be a lot of fun. So hope we can count on you guys all being there.